So we've recently concluded the first coming of the SA20, and we wanted to dig into this a little bit deeper. So we've invited Daniel Gallan onto the show, cricket journalist for all things South Africa. Dan, welcome to the 212 Men.
No, thanks, boys. Thanks for having me. Good to be on.
Good to have you. So I guess the most immediate question would be your overall feelings on the tournament. It was obvious from outsiders, from being in the UK, there was a lot of build-up for this, weren't there? But initial reaction, what do you think?
Yeah, well, you know, I'm like you. I'm in the UK. I live in London. But obviously, I've got strong roots to South African cricket, and I read a few pieces on it. I interviewed Graham Smith before the tournament started, and from the outside looking at it, it looked like a great success. South African cricket needed a financial shot in the arm, and I don't think that they're going to get all the money from this tournament because they still got to pay back investors, and a lot of the money was loaned, etc., etc. But it was a sign to those Indian investors that this is a tournament worth sticking with. The foreign stars shone. Joss Butler topped the run scoring charts. Roelof van der Merwe topped the wicket charts. I know he's South African, but he plays in the Netherlands, so we'll count him as a foreign import. And yeah, full crowds, great buzz. Every journalist who I spoke to, and I spoke to a few around the country, from Paul to Cape Town to Durban, Pretoria, Joburg, said it was great. I know that Faf du Plessis absolutely loved it. You know, you would when you play like that. So yeah, just an absolute shot in the arm. I mean, it's been pretty dire for South African cricket. The Test team has really struggled. The women's team has gone off a cliff in terms of its golden generation. The men's one-day side, obviously, as you know, bombed from another World Cup in pretty embarrassing fashion. They didn't have a title sponsor, which they do now, Castle Lager. So it's been a pretty dire 2-3 years, if I can say. So just seeing positivity around South African cricket, like, really, you know, just brings a smile on my face as someone connected to the game in South Africa, as a fan and then as a journalist. It's just a good vibe. So yeah, it's kudos to Graham Smith and the team, but also to Cricket South Africa, who also deserves some credit.
And in terms of kind of stakeholders, I suppose in England especially, I think we can be quite stuffy, I suppose, around IPL investment and kind of private investment in the game. Is it solely a positive experience in terms of that investment coming over into South Africa? Is it truly positive? Is it a shot in the arm and no caveats to that?
Well, I think caveats are the domain of the privileged. South African cricket can't afford to turn its nose up at anyone who wants to invest in the game. Cricket in England is doing just fine without IPL investment. South African cricket was going belly up. As I said, there was years of mismanagement under the previous regime. This current regime, well, 2 regimes ago, I guess, the previous regime walked away because they weren't, you know, the man in charge wasn't thrilled with what was going on, and now this current setup is trying to pull its image out of the wreckage. And yeah, the fact that the IPL owners have recognized that their local franchises can actually become a franchise in the truest sense of the word, and have a colonies in different parts of the cricket ecosystem. South African cricket has an appetite. You know, South Africa has an appetite for the game. The stadiums are great. There's a constant conveyor belt of talent. The timing is good, both for the UK market and for the Indian market. You know, the Indian market can knock off work, go get themselves something to eat, and then there's a T20 on. It's certainly more appealing than Australia or the West Indies. So it's kind of it is a perfect place for people with money to come in and invest. So yeah, I think there were some concerns, and maybe there are still some concerns that the local flavor has been diluted. I mean, it's called the Mumbai Indians Cape Town, you know, and by the end of it, we're just going to be calling them the Mumbai Indians, really. I mean, the Joburg Super Kings, I don't know if the word Chennai was in it, but I'm pretty sure at some point there will be, and they wear the same colors. The media managers are all brought in. So if I wanted to get an interview, it's not my usual contact at Cape Town or Johannesburg. It's the person from Chennai or from Mumbai. So there is definitely a foreign feel, and South Africa has a problem with xenophobia. There's I don't know how much into the weeds you want to get into the socio-political ecosystem and environments in South Africa, but there's a mistrust of foreign nationals in South Africa generally. So there was slight apprehension, but the product was so good, and those foreign investors have. I haven't seen the writing yet, but Graham Smith has assured me and everyone else who he's spoken to that those foreign investors will be expected to invest in the local cricket structures, grassroots cricket, invest in coaches, establish talent hubs in less privileged areas like townships and rural areas in South Africa. So if that comes to fruition, then hey, wherever they're coming from, if they're bettering South African cricket, I'm all for it.
Can I ask you, Dan, a question about crowds? Because we spoke about, obviously, this podcast is built around the love of international cricket and the memories that we get through touring places. Well, certainly England touring places like South Africa. And I was at the last Test match at Newlands, and England tourists sort of mask over a little bit. But when you've seen other series, it's brought sadness to us because you've seen a lot of these grounds empty. And I think, especially in Test cricket, crowds have lessened over the years. But for this tournament, we saw ram crowds. He says, what do you think is the appeal that sort of generated that excitement, and what do you think has caused the lower crowds in the first place?
I'll start with the second question first. It doesn't just happen overnight where crowds start disappearing. People become disaffected and disconnected from the cricket team. Losing certainly drives crowds away. But it's a difficult question. I think people have become disconnected from the brand of South African cricket. I think continuously losing at ICC events, the declining fortunes of the Test team, the fact they don't really play a lot of Test matches now anyway. There's just kind of been a stink around South African cricket. A lot of people have become grown frustrated with the mismanagement of funds at CSA headquarters, and just generally like I said, the brand had taken a hit as a result. I think why people had gravitated, and COVID didn't help as well. When it's expensive, if you think the cost of living crisis is tough in the UK, it's harder in South Africa where there's rolling blackouts. There's rampant unemployment. There's great disillusionment around the government and the way the country is run. So it all kind of negativity begets negativity, and cricket in South Africa it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's part of the broader narrative within the country, and people just had turned away from it, I suppose. Why there were crowds this time, I think the newness of it. I think the promise of something exciting. All the big players were playing. All of South Africa's centrally contracted players were playing. And I'm looking at the stats now. The top run scorers: Jos Buttler, Faf du Plessis, Aiden Markram, Heine Klaasen, Quinton de Kock, Will Jacks. Those are big names. And you look at the wicket takers: Rula van der Merwe, an exciting international. Arnold Nokia, the fastest South African currently. Jared Coetzee, a young tearaway. I'm looking further down. Jimmy Neesham, Adil Rashid.
Household names, aren't you?
Exactly. And I think we can maybe talk about the actual cricket as well, because let's face it, there was nothing that was on the field that we hadn't seen before. The CSA, the SA20 didn't reinvent the T20 game. There wasn't anything new in terms of the tactics or the style of play. It was some dude was running up and bowling a ball, and another dude was trying to whack it into orbit, and the team that did that, scored most runs wins. We've seen this all before. We've seen it in India. We've seen it, you can call it the 100. You can call it the Big Bash, you can call it the CPL, whatever you want to call it. It's still a game of cricket, but it's that star quality. You know, it's why people tune in, because you want to watch the best in the world, and for who was available, I think. I mean, consider that the Australians and the Indians went around. I mean, the fact the English really came to the party on the field. So, and I think a lot of South Africans recognized that this needed to work. I think the marketing was good. I think the journalists who were brought on board, not in any propaganda sense. I don't want to think that I'm a tool, a propaganda tool. No journalist wants to think that. But when I spoke to Graham Smith and when I spoke to the press officers and to other journalists, I think everyone who had bought into the project really recognized that this needed to work. That if it didn't work, a guy like Marco Jansen, who had a great Test series here in England recently, one of the only ones who played well. A guy like Marco Jansen might not have a Test career, and a guy like Gerald Coetzee or Devold Brevis might not have a Test career because there just won't be any money to fund a red ball game. So this SA20 again didn't exist in isolation. It's part of something, and the fact that it seems to have worked, at least in its opening act, is a really positive sign for the future generation of South African cricket. If this can gain a foothold and start, and who knows, maybe start attracting Indian talent. If they're going to be owned by Indian players, maybe we might see, you know, some young guns at first and then some senior players, and we might see even an expansion of teams. I'm sure Bloemfontein would love to have a team. You could certainly get a team in Potchefstroom perhaps, or Kimberley. So it's just it worked because I think enough people wanted it to work.
How much do you think this is South Africa reading the future and saying we've got to get their first movers into this kind of franchise system, and how much of it is we need to do this to protect the national side? Where do you think the priorities lie for Cricket South Africa?
Yeah, it's both. It's varied. I think that they you know, it's often, you know, how often do you hear of some? I think of the guy who played, the actor whose name Matt LeBlanc, the guy who plays Joey Tribbiani in Friends, who like rocked up to his audition with $5 in his pockets, and he gave it his all because he knew that if he didn't get this gig, it just you know, that was it. I mean, how often do you hear of some entrepreneur or some billionaire who bet the house on red and won it all, and you know, it seemed like a genius move. I think if we look back in 10 years time and we say that SA20 in 2023 saved South African cricket, and they're back competing for the World Test Championship or whatever iteration it'll be then, and we've got stars, the likes of Abe de Villiers and Hashim Amla and Dale Steyn. It isn't South African cricket amazing, and don't those fallow years seem like so long ago? Well, yeah, maybe that will look like a masterstroke, but really, what other choice did they have? It's not like there were any other options. You know, Cricket South Africa and Graham Smith, who is a divisive figure. He's not necessarily the most liked person. I'm certainly not going to comment on his character, but I know that a lot of people don't you know, like his vibe, as it were. He loves South African cricket. He deeply. I mean, he captained it for many years, and he dragged that team and turned it into the best Test team in the world. Sure. You know, certainly I would say one of the three best Test teams we have ever seen, alongside the great Australians and the great West Indians. You know, they were phenomenal. Yeah. So he deeply cares about South African cricket, and I think he recognized that, you know, they were running out of chips, and they had to put it on something that had the potential to work. And you know, it's just one season. You know, look at the Big Bash now; it's struggling. It will soon be replaced. I think as if it hasn't already been replaced as the second best competition in the world, it certainly will be soon. So nothing lasts forever, but the early signs are really positive.
And can the national team sort of ride this momentum wave now? Do you think this will give the national team a boost in terms of everything from fan level interest to the team performance, etc.?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the answer is yes. Fan engagement, certainly. They've got a series coming up against the West Indies, and well, we've seen the crowd. There've been pretty good crowds at the Women's World Cup now, the home Women's World Cup, and you know, Paul has to speak. Paul had steadily been growing as one of the great cricket centres in South Africa. Now I think it is firmly established. It's amazing. I actually haven't been to watch a game at Boylan Park in Paul, but I will certainly do it the next opportunity. It looks like such a great atmosphere. So yeah, the crowd's behind him. We know that when the crowd's behind players, they tend to perform better. That packed crowds means that there's greater, you know, companies want to invest, and the more the companies invest, the more money Cricket South Africa has, and the more money Cricket South Africa has, they can invest in grassroots, and they broaden the talent pool, and they create better players, and they can give people better contracts, so they're not tempted to go play for in franchised competitions. They can stick with South Africa because they know it's financially viable. I mean, like I said, Castle Lager have now come on as a title sponsor, which is the first thing.
Good beer.
And a good beer, yeah, absolutely. If you've been to the Newlands test, you'll know all about Castle Lager.
Yeah, it's like forced upon you, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think just in terms of the players and the mindset of South African cricket, I think South Africa will take a leaf out of England's book, and you know, hopefully give a guy like Brevis a go, and be more attacking, and you know, we've seen the impact that the IPL has had on young Indians. I mean, look at Pant, for example, or Bumrah. You know, these are guys who got IPL gigs early in their development, rubbed shoulders with you know, all the best players from around the world. I mean, a guy sharing a young South African batter sharing a dressing room with Joss Butler in the Paul Royals. You know, that's as great an education as you can hope to get. You know, you watching the best batter in the world by a distance train, how he goes about his business, how he reacts on the field. You know, just from simple things like how he laces up his boots. You know, and if you're a young batter and you're watching that, even if you didn't play a game in this SA20, you've learned so much from just spending 4 weeks around in this guy's orbit. So yeah, it can only have a positive impact. I'm not just trying to sound like a cheerleader here, but I genuinely can't think of, you know, I could sit down and try and write some cutting piece, but I genuinely can't think of any downside. I don't know. Maybe the downside is that South African cricket becomes too reliant on this, and if and when that bubble bursts, they've got nothing to fall back on, and it becomes sort of almost an IP blackout or crash, as it were. But no, I think it's going to impact everyone from the base of the pyramid all the way to the top.
It's really interesting that, because we've often spoken over the last year or so of having a real doom and gloom time on the podcast of talking about franchise cricket and talking about the death of Test cricket, and actually hearing the complete opposite end of the spectrum of, if you're Cricket South Africa, if you're a South African fan, this is a complete revitalisation of the sport for you as a fan, and you get to see Butler versus Nokia or Archer versus Stubbs at Cape Town, and like, that is the best you can get as a South African fan, and why wouldn't you love this investment? It's really, I think,
like I said, negativity, and you know, I've lived here now for 4.5 years, and I've written for various English publications about the English game. I mean, I think I'm still mostly seen as the South African guy, but you know, I pay attention to what's going on in English cricket, and I find the negativity really. I don't want to sound like I'm wagging a finger, but it does sound like people in first class complaining about the quality of the champagne. It does. A lot of the gripes do seem like things that you would only pick at if you were privileged, and you can't know what it's, you know, that's not an indictment on English cricket. I'm not asking every single English cricket fan to, before they complain about the possible demise of Glamorgan or Sussex or why their favorite player is being squeezed out by a foreign import, for example. I'm not asking them to immediately start thinking of the plight of Zimbabwean cricket, for example. But South African cricket and South African cricket fans, just would love to have the problems that England have. Is just the truth of it. So the fact that this is a boost. It's not a panacea, but it is a boost. And yeah, long may it continue. But I want to start seeing. I want to see those development hubs built by the foreign owners. I want to see a women's SA20. There's absolutely no reason why there shouldn't be one next year. I want to see in 3 years' time the young leg spinner who learned from Rashid, and has come through and developed his game. So let's have this podcast in 4 years' time and assess the impact of SA20 over that time. But yeah, right now all signs are pointing up.
Yeah, I like that comment about champagne in first class, because it is true. Like when you sat in Lords in a full house, like you are gonna just not seeing the way everyone else sees it. Yeah. It's
I suppose you've given obviously some of your hopes there, but to finish the show, I guess, what would you say, Dan, for where this money that obviously South Africa are going to come into now, where would you like to see that invested?
Well,
where needs it the most, I guess, is probably the priority.
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I guess there's two. I want to see it invested in a women's game. I want to see an SA20 women's competition. That should run. I don't think it should run parallel. I think it should run concurrently or at a different time of the year, because if it does run parallel, it'll just be dwarfed. Although the Big Bash seems to have done a pretty good job of it, and so do the 100. So maybe you could actually run a parallel. I don't know. Can I retract that? Let's run a parallel. Also, because when else would you do it? So I'd like to see a women's game, and yeah, like I said, investment in grassroots. I want to see a Mumbai Indians Cape Town development hub in Khayelitsha. I want to see a Johannesburg Super Kings development hub in Alexandra Township. I want to see a Durban Super Giants development hub in rural KwaZulu-Natal, because South African cricket is still I guess we'll struggle for a long time. That yes, South Africa might have a big population, but it's not drawing its cricket talent from that entire population. It's drawing it from a very few select elite privileged schools. Exactly. And I've written on many. If no South African journalist hasn't written on the subject. So when the cricket, we look at a guy like Kagiso Rabada and we think, oh, that's great, isn't the country transforming? But Kagiso Rabada's parents are incredibly wealthy, and they sent him to an elite school. Like one of the most expensive schools in the country. Great that black talent is being recognized and is now able to go to those schools. But until such time that we're drawing talent from working class and poor households, we can't say that the country has truly transformed. So that's where I'd like to see the money go. That and the women's program.
Well, Dan, obviously me and you met online, but anyone who's got any sort of love or interest in South African cricket can always find your stuff on CrickBuzz, Wisdom, The Guardian. We're really pleased, obviously, you've enjoyed the tournament, that the tournament seems to have gone down well in the country, and hopefully that can be a massive boost for Cricket South Africa. So thanks for joining us this evening.
Cheers.
No worries, fellas. Good to have good to have this podcast. You guys are doing a good job, and if you ever see me around a press box, hit me up.
Well, the castle in
person.
Cheers.
I will have a castle. Absolutely, we'll have a castle. First round's on me.
Cheers, Dan.
Cheers.